Why don't we get started, guys? That clock is about 2 minutes behind, and so it's just about 4. And I was going to mention that I committed to going to judging a high school science fair today. Bill's going to go too, so we have to we're supposed to be there at 4, so impossible I'm going to make that. But I won't be able to stay much afterwards, so we'll get started early and just finish as soon as I can. Let me just mention that there is a paper for this talk. Okay, anybody who wants the paper is a draft paper. Just holler at me and I'll send you the paper. Okay. So we're talking today about order, and in particular, I'm going to talk about spontaneous order in the sense of Hayek, and then I'm going to invoke this Herbert Simon ideas of we're going to basically not get optimality out of this. I've written this up here. My son is also Robert, and so he helped me get the data on this thing and did some other stuff. And I'm just going to report the fact that when I was in Santa Fe recently, I encountered the following. And we're in this era of a lot of social norms are changing, and I wonder. It does seem to me. I've just put the slide up here just for your own just as food for thought, I guess. Changing social norms associated with authorship. So I was just in Santa Fe, and when I was a graduate student, this great paper by Fermi Post-WWII was something that meant a lot to me. This is one where they basically put a bunch of coupled in the 1950s when they first invented the digital computer. They put a bunch of coupled oscillators. And they thought it would just kind of, a large number of coupled oscillators, they would just kind of go to become kind of ergodic, and just be producing kind of, noise. And what happened is they got all synchronized up. And so I cited, Dorn Farmer and I cited that in this long paper that we wrote for the JEL. And when I was in Santa Fe recently, someone said, you can't call it Fermi Post-WWII anymore. It's got to be Fermi Post-WWII Singu. Because she actually wrote the code for the darn thing. So those guys just had the idea, and she did much of the hard work. No, I don't say all of it, much of it. So I just many journals, as you know, now ask authors to distinguish who did what on the thing, and so I have not done that yet on this paper. But by referencing my son in the title, I'm just saying that he did some of it. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. What is some people who come to our field from other fields say this is strange that the social sciences have this alphabetical order. Does it produce high welfare or not? And some of you may know there are all these studies about things like lots of alpha, beta, gamma, ABC authors are over represented in the literature for no good reason. So I just leave that and move on here. Okay, so today we're going to talk about a very empirical thing, but something which we can sink our teeth into both empirically and mathematically. So I'm going to this is just outline, but basically the idea is that we're going to look at eventually we're going to look at what did Hayek say about how does spontaneous order arise, what does it mean. I'm going to basically argue that the spontaneous order is a very special case of what all of us have come to know as emergent. So in complexity, none of us can give a very good definition of emergence, but we know it when we see it kind of thing, right? We say that in the Schelling segregation model, nobody wants to have a segregated outcome, but there emerges segregation at the microscopic level. Okay. Then I'm going to give a couple different perspectives on this, whether you're an OR person or whether you're come from an engineering background or ABM perspective. We'll see more about that. Okay. So this is a Google map of a one-lane bridge in Fairfax County, and I'm going to show where it is. I think on the next slide. So we are here. This is the west side of the Beltway, and we are George Mason. I made a map with George Mason in it, and we're looking at a small road up there. That's 100 Mill Road, the north-south road. There has a number on it. I can't read it. It's 636 or something. Right adjacent to Fairfax, to Lake Fairfax. So many of you will know this area. It's Reston, and the reason why I know about this phenomenon that we're going to describe is so I drove this route for about 10 years because. My daughter played on a travel soccer team, so-called. I was the manager of the darn thing, and they practiced in Lake Fairfax, okay? And they would practice in the afternoon or evening, and so I would then so even though I live in McLean over here, I'd have to drive from George Mason up to there where they're practicing, and so I would drive up through Oakton, and I would have to go through this, go on this small road until you get into Lake Fairfax by going off Barron Cameron on the east-west road to the north. So had to go up around Lake Fairfax and then come back into it. Okay, so that's my experience with this. That's how I get introduced to this thing. Now here is the view of it in a close-up, and what you see here is these are just some power wires going through here. This is a suburban neighborhood, but there's a creek that goes between Lake Fairfax and that Colvin Run Mill Park. There's a creek that goes right through here. And this is the single lane bridge right here. You can kind of see the outline of the bridge. there. Now notice there are a couple other things to look at. There was a white line both north and south. It's at the very north of and the very south here. Cars basically, when this road is crowded, cars queue up at the single, at this mark in the road. Now it doesn't really say to do that, but the people who travel this route know that. There's also this funny, there's actually a bike trail cutting across here for kind of, you can ride your bike from the whole bike path connecting all those parts in northern Fairfax County. So you can ride your bike.
Cross-county trail.
Maybe you know it, Ken, yeah, okay. And so occasionally there'll be, a biker will have the gust to stick the nose out here despite the 40-mile-an-hour traffic going up and down, and then we'll cross. Okay, so that's the basic setup of this thing. It is a single-lane bridge. There are other single-lane bridges in northern Virginia or in Fairfax County. I'll mention a couple of them, but this one has the property that at least a couple times a day it gets very crowded because there's people coming from the residential neighborhoods up there down to the Dulles Access Road, which is down here somewhere, or going home at night from their jobs there. Okay, so that's the setup. And so here I've written down what is the observed behavior. So most times of the day, there's so little traffic on this road that people just blow through the one-lane bridge. Right? They approach it, they see there's no oncoming traffic, and they just go through it. But if there is oncoming traffic, you have to do this mental calculation and say, who's going to get there first? If I'm going to get there first, I have the right of way, I'm going to go, and the other guy has to slow down. But if the other guy's going to get there first, then you better slow down. Otherwise, you can't, if you both meet on this one-lane bridge, you will not get through. Unless you have some kind of smart car or something, right? Or maybe a motorcycle would probably work. I'm not sure Vince wants to test it though. If there are several oncoming vehicles, then in fact there's that white line I showed you on the previous slide, and the cars will stop behind there. So maybe there's a couple oncoming cars. If you're going to physically stop, you'll stop on the white line. Now I've written here, much of the time when the vehicles are stopped, when you reach to the front of the line, you're going to go in single fashion. You're just going to go across the road. Okay, so you're going to go across the bridge. Kind of when there's kind of like this maybe it's a random queue of like 0, 1, or 2 something. You're stopped and then you wait for the car to go to come at you. Then you go. But when in fact there are stable queues, so when in fact it's kind of rush hour, and you can get queues of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It can go up to quite large numbers. 10, 20 cars can be here. Then something else happens. Okay, and at this point, some of you have read the paper. Some of you have solved this problem in one of my classes as an exam or something. For those of you who don't know what happens, and there probably are some of you who don't know what happens here, I just think this would be a good time to have some guesses as to what happens. Okay. So if we report there's some other phenomena going to happen than just cars going single file across, first come, first served, first in, first out queue. It's something else happens. So anybody want to say it again, Vince?
Groups of 5 or 7.
Groups of 5 or 7. Excellent guess. Any other thoughts about it?
Go until the queue has expended itself and then on the outside?
A queue totally dumps out and then the other side gets to go. Yeah. Both good guesses. Anybody else have any general ideas about it? When the queues are kind of short, something like what Kevin says happens, and what Vince has just mentioned is really what our model shows is it's what should happen. But what actually does happen instead is when it's crowded, you get pairs going across the bridge, just 2 at a time.
So if they're from Massachusetts, it would be 3 at a time.
Oh, okay.
In Massachusetts, the law is you stop at a stop sign behind somebody else.
Yep.
For 3 people back, 3 people get to go.
Permitted to go.
Sign.
Okay.
Provided there's nobody else coming.
Right, yeah. If it's clear.
Did you follow laws in Massachusetts?
See, I never knew that existed. I lived in Massachusetts for 20 years.
So
Did you ever follow that law?
No, I had no idea.
Was that on the driver's test?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, is there right away?
Not for me.
So in Germany, this happens a lot. These are all over the country in Germany.
Okay.
And it works out very well, but there's a right of way. So if you're coming from the north direction, you have right of way. If you approach the other car, and they do follow the rules in Germany. Is that the case here?
No, so it's not, no. In fact, to check what the rules are actually, so I consulted. I don't see him here. There's a assistant professor of traffic over here in SEOR, and he said that he explained what the rules are, and they are not that. There's a small posting. It just basically says 1 lane bridge ahead. It's not quite so terse. I should have taken a picture of it. It doesn't say just beware, but it says something like proceed with caution or something, or yield or something. There's one.
So the thing on NPR the other day about people who drive expensive cars versus people who drive cheap cars. And then the experiment was someone would walk across the road, and with the cheap car, people who drove cheap cars tend to stop and let the person cross the road, or people driving expensive cars and didn't stop.
Is that right?
And it was on one of those, hidden drain type of things.
It's a kind of
Entitled,
rich.
yeah.
Okay.
Does that?
Rich, I know.
I'm curious.
Wow.
Does that come out to play here?
I don't know. That's but we haven't checked that. That'd be fun. We have some data. We did not write down the car type.
No.
But we have to go back and get some more data. So I'll task my son with doing that. Write down if there's occasional Ferrari or Lamborghini coming through here, by the way.
Yeah.
So it'll be very familiar with my questions.
Well, you see this at the stop signs here when lights are out, where sometimes a car just doesn't know what to do and it'll just sit there
Okay,
until
uh-huh.
someone
You
honks
gotta
at
honk
it,
at solid,
and then they're
right,
like, all right,
okay.
oh, time for me to go.
Uh-huh.
And they, of course, will go at the wrong time, so that could happen.
That's
Someone
true,
just
too.
sits
That's
there
true,
letting
yeah.
all the other cars just go
And then I
go
wonder if the
go.
person who's behind and is all pissed off and honking, they may
They
just
could-
go anyway, right? With
That-
it.
They could just turn around and go, yeah.
I'm gonna pause the deck here just to show. By the way, could this be a common or rare thing? Right. So Ken has mentioned Massachusetts. I did have in my browser here. I think I did save. I found a list of all the one-lane bridges in America, and so there's a bridgehunter.com. Okay, so some of these are actually some of these
There's
are
a
actually.
website for everything.
And you're on page
Some of them are
42,
fun, I
my
think. So
goodness. And
people of a
keep
certain
going.
age, and most of you are not, but Ken and I, there was a movie in the 80s, I think, Bridges of Madison County. Those are all one-lane bridges, right? And so it turns out Madison County is in Iowa, okay? So I did find it funny that if you look down here, yes, there's some, there's New York State, Pennsylvania. Look at the first one's Iowa, then the fourth one's Iowa, Missouri, Oklahoma, Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, Iowa. What's with Iowa and the one-lane bridges? I don't know, but there's a whole bunch of them in Iowa. So it's maybe because they built them for farmlands and they didn't. I don't know. But, so this is how to navigate one-lane bridges. It's not just confined to Fairfax County. Okay, so next one. Yeah, so this is just from further background. So twice a day, you get these built-up queues here. Okay, so, and the queues are not quite symmetric, but they are, because as soon as this traffic gets stopped in queues, then it starts building up. They're not really stable in the sense that, for example, like if this was my sense is if it wasn't a periodic phenomenon, if it was just a busy road in general, you'd have maybe stable queues and they'd be roughly that kind of constant size. They're not really like that. And I'm going to show you data about that in a second. So they're kind of transient queues. I mean, they last on the order of 45 minutes or an hour, and they kind of ebb and flow. They get bigger and smaller, and because they're heavily stochastic, right? Every once in a while, you have some size 15 queue, but just due to stochastic reasons, they'll just fluctuate down to zero. It'll just go away, and then they'll come back soon. But so it's quite transient. The reason I mention this is because eventually somebody's going to ask me, or maybe I'll mention that. Say, yes, you can try to build a queuing model out of this thing, but it's because it's so transient, it's hard to do that.
Questions?
Yes.
Does any of this have anything to do with how far ahead the person in the queue can see to determine that it's size 3 or
It's a good
size
question,
2?
Claudia. Yes. So it turns out, and I did not mention this, but you make a good point. So it turns out this particular location has one interesting property to address your question. It turns out the road on each side of this creek basically is high, and so you actually descend down to the creek bed level. So it turns out as long as you're in the queue, you can see the whole thing. It's completely open and it's opaque. It's completely open and clear, and you can. So there's never any question about kind of how long you're going to be waiting or that kind of. You can see what's happening. So I can always, for example, when I first entered this thing, I had no idea what was pairs going across it, right? So you observe. You can clearly observe that it's pairs, and you can decide to comport with the norm or not. Okay. Yeah. So I've written here the typical behavior is pairs of vehicles across the bridge. This norm is imperfect, and I'm going to show you data about this. Occasionally, you'll see singletons. Occasionally, there's a person basically, with property rights to be the second car going, and they won't go. They just won't, and because they're used to having just going one at a time, I guess, right? And then I'm going to show you some data about these queue lengths. Okay, this is it. Example. So this was a recent evening in Reston, Virginia. From roughly 5 o'clock. It's a 2-hour time period. Queues are quite unstable for the first half hour. Last half hour is sometimes there's no queue at all. But during the peak of this thing, notice what we did. Basically, we said every minute we basically just counted how long the queue was. two of us there counting this, and it never got up more than about 20, but kind of stable at 10, 12, something in there. But like I say, look, even in the heart of rush hour, it can drop almost to 0. So this is just one instance, one representation of one evening, but showing how the queues. There is, in fact, I think the area under the curve is something like how many cars are in fact queued up over the course of this time period. Right? So if you come here, you're going to wait. That's another way to say it, right? If you come here, you're not going to be able to blast through. You're going to be waiting. And I know that because there were several times when I needed to get to Lake Fairfax, and I was pissed off that I was stuck in this queue. And I thought, why did they put a stoplight in here and let me in? I was the manager of the soccer team. And I was unable to get there, to pay the coach or whatever it was. So. Okay, so now this is another way to look at the same data. So what we also did is every minute for the same. This is for the same day. We said, what fraction? So over the course of a minute, a certain number of cars go through the intersection. What fraction of them go through as pairs? And you see, most of the time you're comporting with the norm of pairs. All these departures are all singletons. We never observed a time when 3 cars went. Okay, 3 or 4 or 5 or 7. We'll see. That's what they should do. So initially, the queues are kind of unstable. They're going through singletons, but occasionally that might be a decent-sized queue. But then, over the next 60 seconds, half the cars that go through are just going like singleton. We go singleton, singleton, singleton. Then some people will be there who are experts. Maybe they go pair, pair, pair. Then a singleton. So it's not a perfectly observed norm. Right? People will deviate from that. Yes.
Do they honk on the people who?
Do they honk? No, there's no. No, although at the end I want to come back and mention about the deviation, but hold the thought. I just, can you go to the scientific literature, traffic engineering or something, and find out much about single lane bridges and this? So I'm going to look up the mass log, Ken. That sounds good. I've written. I showed you the data about 4,000. There are about 4,000 of those bridges that are single lane in the U.S. There's another one over right by where I live, Swinks Mill Road. But this one does not ever get queues, mostly because it's this is a much less traveled route, even though it does hit Georgetown Pike. This is a single lane bridge where it's kind of going around a corner, and it just has a different traffic volume. So I used to drive my kids to Langley High School. By going here, I never observed any kind of. In fact, there are no actually marks in the road where you would stop on this particular one. I've written here the novelty of this one seems to be, even if there were other places where you would have traffic jams of this type, and because this is episodic, it's only at rush hour, it seems like it's somewhat different. Okay, I couldn't find very much in here, but now this is this will not be news for some of you in the room, perhaps, that we had this question on a qualifying exam. I looked up 2011. Famously, we typically don't give these exams very much anymore in this form because everybody's writing research papers, so nobody has to do these crazy qualifying exams. We had to solve 6 problems in 7 days, including had to write 2 computer programs from scratch in 7 days, and so we did have this in 2011. 10 test takers, 7 of whom answered by building models. Sorry, there were 7 test takers, 7 of whom answered this particular question about this Reston signal lane bridge. And the question we just asked was something like, build a model of it and study the relative efficacy of different behaviors that might arise there. Without maybe we said, did we say that the norm was to have 2 going across? I don't know if we did or not. We didn't say.
You asked what norm would.
That's right. Yeah. We asked what norm might arise, and we got a bunch of great answers. I'm going to show you a picture of them, but it turns out that at that time, or it's still the case, that Karen anonymizes the test takers, and so this year she made everybody famous quarterbacks. So it was like Joe Flacco and Tom Brady and so I typically never. Well, I guess in the term of the day, what is the name for finding out who the underlying person is? We should know this given the events of today, right? Demasking or whatever it is, unmasking, right? I never unmasked who these various performers were. So some of you may have been the performers of these examples. 4 net logo models, 2 Mesa models, 1 other model, and quite different solutions. Here's just the one that I liked. I liked in particular just because they actually made the icon with a little car on it, and obviously you can morph this from the traffic model that comes as part of the main net logo system. But it's giving things like average time in line, current average wait time. It's for the north and south direction. You can change various things on it. So it's a nice model somebody put together in one day, right? We didn't give people much time to do this. What my son and I did is basically we looked at these several submissions. We found out what we liked about all of them, and we kind of distilled it down, and we just basically stole from those student submissions. So I feel a little bit obliged. I probably should make all the. I should probably have Karen unmask the actual performers and put Albert down as a co-author. So maybe that'll happen too. And say there actually one thing that someone did one of the Mason guys. I would say one of the people who used Mason was interesting. They actually had not only these kind of like what Kevin mentioned, empty the queue, or Vince mentioned, have different block sizes. Which I'm going to focus on different block sizes today. But there's also they come up with a whole bunch of different ones, a whole bunch of unusual ones. Things like like signal to the oncoming driver with your lights, and you basically use that to determine how big the group is going to be. They had a whole bunch of interesting ones that were. My sense was that they were not necessarily things you observed in practice, but they just come up with a lot of unusual behaviors. I guess. Let me put it this way. I think the person who did that one had an engineering background, because there were things that would have been ways to basically design the system from the top down to have high performance, even though unclear how you would get it to happen from the bottom up. Okay. Now I'm gonna pause here from the analysis and say, why does this matter for social science at all? And so it turns out that we wrote the paper for a recent conference that we had over in economics on the legacy of Friedrich von Hayek. And not everybody in the room will have the same background on von Hayek, so I'm going to go through a slide or two about Hayek. But in particular, it turns out a couple of years ago, there was a large conference on kind of the legacy of von Hayek from modern modern history of thought and modern economics, modern scientific point of view. And so for that conference, I wrote this long paper, which some of you may have seen, about where I basically said, I said Hayek enriched by complexity, but enriched by Hayek. That is, so Hayek, many of Hayek's ideas, which he wrote back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, have in fact been supplanted by modern complex systems theory. In particular, Hayek was a theorist of kind of decentralized information, how it's hard to aggregate information into a kind of a good God's eye view. How can an economy work if it does not have a God's eye view? That kind of thing. But other areas. So there were some areas then where Hayek had really good ideas that have been supplanted. But there are also a couple of areas where Hayek had good ideas that we still have not figured out how to do better than that. I mean, so I think that so that point of that long paper was to focus on a variety of topics and kind of make some summary judgment about that. And some of you will know there's subsequently been a paper by Sam Bowles and Rajiv Sethi and Alan Kerman in the JEP, which I think they mentioned my paper, but they also go through kind of Hayek's legacy from a modern point of view. Maybe not quite a complexity point of view, but almost. Okay, so I've just written here that Hayek theorized that people left to their own devices can produce pretty good welfare those high welfare configurations of society, and this is the key, are not necessarily the result of any human design. That is, people doing what's best for themselves, or maybe following a particular behavioral norm or something, can produce good outcomes, and those are certainly the result of human action, but no one brain designed it. So this is the essential assertion. Okay, so there arises some things. So here's one simple example. Imagine that while we're sitting in this room, it's cold enough outside, but it's not going to happen. Imagine 6 feet of snow or 3 feet of snowfall. Okay, and so you can't see the sidewalks anymore. And now we're all parked in some parking lot, half a mile away. And so luckily, while we're in here listening to this, students have already beat a path to the cars to the parking lot. Now they beat a path not following the sidewalks, presumably, because there's a whole bunch of snow on the ground. But the more students who follow that path, right, the more that path becomes the path that we should take because it has all the snow off it. And so the question is that a good path or not? Well, it's probably a pretty good path. It's not going to be from here to the parking lot by a Krasnow, right? But it's probably also, it's unclear whether it's going to be something like an optimal path. But Hayek thought that there were basically, without really saying how good the paths would be, he in essence said, well, we should certainly take these paths as important found artifacts about how the world works, whether or not we want to say that they're optimal or not. Now, to say that they're truly optimal, I'll mention this later, is going to be kind of, you know, Panglossian. So to think about Voltaire from the 18th century, right? I mean, it's unlikely that the paths that get just, you know, formed by random acts are going to be optimal. But there is this claim that they actually have pretty good welfare, and so that's what we want to basically put out here. Yes, Ed?
I'm sorry to jump in, but
No, that's fine, yeah.
in his later work, Hayek did kind of footnote this by saying that you have to have the right kind of general rules in order for spontaneous orders to produce anything that's efficient. And so, in a sense, you have to sort of have, you know, the topology of the space has to be like in a certain shape.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So I'm familiar with a bit of that work, and I guess I always worry that some of that stuff that he said when he was older and less analytical was a little bit like, you know, the politician saying we need to do the right thing, right? You should never do the wrong thing. You should always do the right thing, right? We should have smart regulation instead of stupid regulation, right? And so he never, because he never laid out, you know, what is the environment that has to be in place, or what are the rules? He never, and of course it's very hard to do with it in general, right? That I fear that at that point it's right. I think he's acknowledging, for example, I'm going to mention a couple examples here. Well, I mentioned here things like we know there are certain kinds of orders that can arise. Things like, you know, segregation, countertops or parts of the diner where black people can go and white people can go, and then they're different. Or things like, you know, I've even here, pink collar professions. Why is that we have pink collar professions historically? That's something which has emerged. Is that high welfare or is that low welfare? I think it's probably low welfare.
Professor X?
Yes.
I have a question.
Yep.
To what extent does this thinking
Yep.
take into consideration altruism and cooperation or cooperation
Well,
as a
yeah.
decision-making model?
It's
for
ambiguous.
people,
I think it's just ambiguous about that. But it does not say that, you know, the path produced by the snow is only made by individuals. It could be made by, you know, two of us working together. You know, there's many. We're not saying a kind of a how or the reason why these spontaneous orders arise. We're just saying that they do arise for some reason. Now here I'm just trying to say, is it necessary that they have high welfare or not? I'm saying there's no real reason why they need to have high welfare. They could be, but particularly in the case of Jim Crow laws, right, demonstrably low welfare, right, I mean, at least for some of the people involved. So, before I go on to the more, let me just say, it turns out in this, Hayek was not not necessarily, you know, a perfectly original thinker, because, and we usually attribute to Adam Smith the notion of idea that everybody pursuing their own ends can produce a well-functioning society. But even before, that was 1776, but Adam Ferguson, before Adam Smith, said this: every step, every move of the multitude are made with equal blindness to the future. Nations stumble upon establishments which are indeed the result of human actions, but not the execution of any human design. So things arise that no one really plans, but that basically come into force because they serve some purpose. And they, it's hard. Basically, once they get established, it's hard to displace them, right? Without, for example, they may be quite a bottom-up process that displaces it, that causes it, and you may require something top-down, right? It may take LBJ to decentralize or to integrate the Arkansas schools or something, right? Because it's not going to happen by itself from the bottom up. So I think that Hayek is opaque, at least, about what the welfare claims are for these things. Although I think the fact that it's spontaneous order somehow asserts that it's kind of a good thing. But once again, there can be good orders and bad orders.
But there's an underlying value system with segregation that doesn't apply with the snow situation. I don't think they're the same.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just saying that there has to be some welfare measure. We're just saying that, for example, in the snow situation, maybe it's the travel time to your car. And then here it's going to be there's some social welfare function. We should be specific about that if we're going to build a model of a particular.
But I think what you're saying here, Rob, is that when these spontaneous orders do arise, it's not always the case that they will have a high welfare.
Right,
It's not always the case that we want them to be beneficial or that they are beneficial. They just arise.
Right, and so the way you said it, Joe, is it would be, I think, would be a natural way to say it. It's not always the case that they're high welfare. I want to say it a little different. I want to say, is it the case that they would ever have high welfare? And now watch this. So if you think about spontaneous order, it's just all of us kind of have some idea in this room about what it means to have emergence. A spontaneous order is a kind of just emergent outcome. It's an emergent macroscopic property. Now, why do we think that has to have any kind of good welfare property? And think about many of the things that we talk about as being as emerging are things like nasty side effects from some new law, right? Some new law gets passed. It's supposed to do it has some do-good or objective, but then it has some very nasty side effect, right?
Well,
And so,
So the path problem is typical of what the old problem of where to put the paved paths on a university that you just built.
yeah, right,
And you just plant grass everywhere and see where everybody goes.
And then put the sidewalk
that's
in
a
the-
little bit different than the snow, but the assumption behind that is that those represent the most efficient paths. People
Why? I'm asking
choose
why
them.
though, Ken, why?
Well, that's coming back from an engineering perspective of, in order for something to do some good, it has to have human design. And so,
Right,
the contrary
it's the
is
engineering version,
that
that's
it,
right.
it does not need to have human design in order to ensure high welfare. However, human action does not guarantee high welfare.
Right. So it's 1865, and we have to figure out how to organize our society. And so a bunch of institutions get changed and
More or
corrupt,
less before the war.
and it's very unclear that those have produced good outcomes. Yes.
I think the big difference in this case is with the sidewalks, everybody has an equal vote of where to walk. So you have an equal polling of where for the
All right,
sidewalk.
yeah.
Segregation, you have only a select people voting. So that's
Right,
kind of where that comes in.
Fair enough.
to play.
Well, it might be the kind of thing that maybe if all the undergraduates vote where to put the sidewalk, that would be different than all of us who are graduate students or faculty who are going to vote. Maybe
So Rob, would synchrony fall under the same umbrella as this?
Yeah, so it
Because
turns
for-
out-
synchrony is another example of
Exactly. Yeah. So it turns out that
Meaningless cooperation.
is a very interesting scientific footnote. Some of you may know that one of the important theorists, modern theorists of synchrony, is Professor Strogatz from Cornell in the math department. So he subtitled his book was the title of the book was Sync, right? The subtitle of it was something like Studies in Spontaneous Order, and of course spontaneous order is Hayek's coined term, right? So I asked Strogatz, I said, I did not know you were a aficionado of Austrian economics and von Hayek. He said, "What's Austrian economics and who's von Hayek?" So it was simply random that he had put those two words together in his
With
book title.
spontaneous order.
So yeah, sorry, but you're right. There's a close to it.
So we look at large-scale optimization problems,
Yeah.
and if we look at deterministic versus non-deterministic methods, so we know that non-deterministic methods are not guaranteed to find optimal solutions,
That's right, yeah.
right? They're just kind of they can find good solutions,
Yeah.
local optima.
Right.
Without a deterministic, analysis of the whole space, you're not guaranteed to find
There is, as you know,
global optima.
there is in some stochastic order, there are things like dominance theories where I can say this stochastic thing always dominates that other one, right? You can do some kind of that kind of stuff, but in general, right, short of having the deterministic thing. But for in your own work, I would say things like think about we emerged certain kinds of biochemical metabolic cycles in the world. And for example, it turns out, I think the numbers are, I think Stu Kaufman told me one time, right? All the real world metabolic cycles used one of 25 amino acids somewhere in the cycle. But there actually are 125 amino acids that you can make in the chemistry labs. But only 25 of them have been used by nature. Why those 25? Now, should we assume that is because those are the most energetically efficient ones? And I think I'm going to guess that that's probably not a good assumption to make. But I know we can ask the origin of life research for that. But I guess in general, the picture is is that to use Stu Kaufman terminology, there's going to be some frozen accidents that happen, right? Things get locked in, a la Brian Arthur, right? And we should know why did the Jim Crow laws get locked in for roughly 100 years, and not 2 years versus 2,000 years? I mean, that's a whole other issue about transitions out of these things. So, anyway, so I think we can have a good discussion about these things, and I want to have one at the end. Hopefully, we can leave time for that at the end too. So I mentioned this was the title of this paper that I wrote. So there's two papers then. There's this older paper about kind of Hayek and complexity, then there's a new paper about this bridge. So I've written, I just mentioned already that in some ways Hayek's out of date. I thought on the spontaneous order thing, I think his ideas are a little bit out of date because they have this implicit welfare property, and I think that if we really think about emergence, it's just happening from a bunch of agents interacting and producing some kind of emergent structure. We don't need to think about necessarily these things having, right? There emerges only 25 amino acids out of 125 that are possible. Maybe we'd all have much bigger brains, be a lot smarter if we had used the 26th amino acid. I don't know. And then emergence. But then the other areas, just as a footnote, other areas where I think that arguably the modern theory of general equilibrium, a la Arrow and Debreu, is impoverished precisely because it does not have things like institutions in there, and the process of the market is something which von Hayek theorized, and he had a special term for that, so it's absent. He also, in his Nobel address, Hayek said, a good economist should be like a gardener, right? It's not that you say, I'm I'm going to plant this factory and that other thing over there. I'm going to get exactly this coming out. You don't know what's going to happen. You just make the rules and you see what comes out of your garden. Yes, you prune the weeds out of it. Yes, you take the bad stuff out of it, but you don't. It's hard to. So the economy as a machine versus the economy as a garden. Which one is more? I mean, for certainly the case that for probably in the 20th century version of mathematical economics, it's a lot more like the economy as a machine. And I think that today we can really think of this as the more potent metaphor. Anyways, that's just for the background. I guess, so we discussed this kind of stuff already, I guess. How do the paths arise between 2 points? By the way, I was recently reading something where they said, lots of, I guess we were driving to West Virginia, and when you go through the Cumberland Gap, right, we're actually, there's a super highway now, right, on something that used to be, basically it's roughly the same path that the wagon trains took. It just happened to be a low point, a place to, I guess the same efficient things that worked when you were walking or when you're going at 2 miles an hour are ostensibly the ways we go 80 miles an hour now. And is that in fact the optimal thing or not? I mean, we can talk more about that at the end. Sometimes these new practices, when they you'll have something will become the norm. There's some new practice will arise. It'll become obvious that it's better, and that will become the new norm. We can also have things like local social orders become global because they get instantiated as laws, right? So, driving the right side of the road. There was a time when it was unclear on the right side of the road or the left side of the road. Archaic laws and gets to planet. So all these things are involved with spontaneous order, and I think that also the notion of spontaneity is also potentially problematical here because it's not obvious that everything has to be spontaneous. Yes, question.
Yeah, I guess that was my question because I grew up around here, and I grew up in Great Falls where there's like a lot of one-way bridges, and I don't know where I heard this from, but when I was learning how to drive, somebody told me you have to go two at a time if there's like a long line.
Okay.
So
your driver ed teacher told you that or something.
Somebody came up with that somewhere at some point. So
all right.
I don't know if that emerged as like a norm because.
So hold that thought. 'Cause I want to come back to that at the end. At the end, I want to ask the question. I want to say, imagine that we were going to change the norm. What would we have to do? Was it just tell the driver ed teacher something different, or could we do it a different way? Anyways, the final bullet. Many of these things have just vague welfare properties. So it's unclear how good they're. Okay. When you think about what all of us know from Santa Fe and beyond, Brian Arthur, Stu Kaufman, etc. I mean. We think about self-organization are that there is some notion of the self, and we get from a bunch of chemical reactions happening on a piece of slate. Well, you get a cell wall around there, and all of a sudden you get a single cell. Multi-cells can do more than single cells. Groups of people can do more than individuals, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this idea of self-organization, emergence. We have some words for it, micro to macro. So I mean, I guess from my point of view, it seems like these ideas are kind of vast generalizations of spontaneous order, but I'm prepared to talk about that at the end when we have time to discuss it. Okay, fine. The next thing to say is that I want to start to get to the question of why two on the Reston Bridge, why not 5 or 7? As Vince, I'm going to just allude to the fact that 5 or 7 is better than 2. We'll show that in a minute. And then of course you have this whole history of kind of critics of optimal theorizing. And this is the time I want to just stop for a moment and say, there is in fact a style of theorizing in finance in particular and economics also, which goes as follows. It would say, if in fact there's welfare gain to be had, it will arise. Something will happen, something will get built, somebody will recognize it, and it'll happen. The simplest example is the efficient market hypothesis. People are going to say in efficient markets, markets must be efficient because if they were not, if there was a possibility to make a little bit of money in there, somebody would jump in there. David Shaw or somebody would jump in there and make money off that, and they would basically arbitrage that money-making opportunity away.
So if you carry that argument, that means that the market must eventually operate at its
efficiency. That's right. And then there's a corollary, which is Milton Friedman's 1953 argument about all firms in America are efficient, because if they were not, they would be driven out of business. I mean, yes, on some time scale, of course, on some time scale, every firm goes out of business, right? So that's a possible critique. So when I was a graduate student, we were just at the beginning of kind of thinking about behavioral economics, and today we know a lot about how people can't do the calculations, people don't have enough information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons why people can't really operate in with full rationality. And so I've written here, good departments in social sciences started putting in experimentalist behavioralists in the 90s. And then here at George Mason, Vernon Smith won the Nobel Prize with Kahneman in the 2000s. Just the most recent Nobel Prize, Thaler, behavioral stuff, including behavioral finance. So we certainly have, from Simon being the lone voice for this in the 50s till today, we have certainly a great growth of behavioral reasons to say, people can't do the optimal thing. So what I intend to do now is to show you what is the optimal thing to do in the Reston Bridge. And then, but it's an open question as to what can we invoke from this literature to get to why it's pairs. I don't know the answer to that, so I'm looking for input. Three or four different perspectives. We're going to talk about a traffic perspective, an OR perspective, and an age-based modeling perspective on this problem. So here's the traffic perspective. So it turns out that what you would imagine would be better here from a point of view of getting higher throughput would be to put in a traffic light, a stoplight, and it's going to flip periodically, and it's going to let stuff go through. It's basically going to dump the queues that you're not getting today. But then in the middle of the night, at 2 in the morning, when there's nobody there, it's stupid to sit there and have to wait for it, right? So then you want to have some kind of smart adaptive things. But when I talked to the guy over there in engineering, he basically said it's like 5 to 10 times more expensive for one of these smart lights, because you got to put in a bunch of stuff, a bunch of sensors in the ground, that kind of stuff, right? So, and in general, it's fairly expensive to put in a traffic light. It's on the order of like $10 to the $5th. It's less than $1 million, but more than just say $10,000. Okay, I have this in parentheses here. We actually did have a question also about on a different exam. We had a question about build us a model which compares the efficacy of stoplights versus stop signs versus roundabouts. Now, there's no way to do a roundabout on the bridge, so we're neglecting that now. Given the fact that this jamming happens only for a couple hours a day, I'm going to guess that I don't want to use economic reasoning here, but you could say it must be the case that the DOT has done a cost-benefit analysis and they've decided that it's not efficient. I have no idea whether the DOT has done that analysis or not, right? But economists would say they must have done that, right? It's optimal. We have a Panglossian highway system.
I've asked the transportation people. I talk to DOT a lot of times, in a different capacity. But do they have an agent-based model of traffic?
No, but they have a bunch of guidelines, Ken. In fact, I have the book, traffic engineering book. It actually has these these standard state guidelines, how many vehicles per minute going through here, and does it warrant a light or not? So it's not an age-based model, no.
I hear different words coming out from them when they talk about Braddock Road widening, because I had extensive discussions with them. They usually send you to the next expert and the next expert. What kind of model is it? Well, it's a model. It's a simulation. Right. But the words they use about behavioral processes that people will accelerate, decelerate, that type of thing, made me suspect that somewhere deep in the third consultant back, there's an agent-based model. Is there a commercial agent-based model that traffic planners can use?
There are some consulting companies that basically vend. They say we'll do a study of road X for you, and we will use agents to do that. But it's not an off-the-shelf software, I don't think. Yeah. But I just report that the guy I met over there. I wish I could say anything about it, but I can't. He basically has on his research. He says, I do traffic engineering and agent-based modeling, so that's part of it.
It's in SEOR.
Or civil. Yeah, I think he's civil.
Probably civil. Yeah.
But then he also gave me the traffic engineering book for undergraduates, the traffic engineering textbook for undergraduates. Not a single word about agents in it. So it's just much more about basically queuing theory, kind of applied queuing theory. Yeah. Okay, so there is no light there. I've written here non-standard solutions. I'm going to come back to this again. There are a couple other ways there are a couple other things in this traffic engineering book about ways to deal with these things, but they're unusual. Let's look now quickly at this is a kind of a queuing theory interpretation. Now the analysis I'm going to show here really only work if the queues were stable. They are not in this case, but this is one way to think about it. Is that imagine approaching the bridge, and there are basically two lines. There are two queues already in place, and for ease of discussion, let's say they're roughly the same length. And so if in fact the queue is of length n, and the social norm is to have cars go in blocks of b, That's going to be the notation here. There's basically going to be a crossing time and a waiting time. So right, it takes you time to go across the bridge, and it takes you time to, you have to wait to go across the bridge. So the crossing time I've written here in the following notation, if we're going to have B vehicles go across, well, this is how long it takes one car to go, the first car to go across, and if the other cars are on their tail, it would take some other amount of time, delta t. So we're in the total amount of time for a block of cars to go across is going to be the time for one car plus the other time for the rest of them to go. So that would just be the physical crossing time. But when you're stuck in the queue, what you basically have to do is you have to wait. You have to wait basically for your side of the queue to dump out as well as the other side of the queue to dump out. And then you have to basically do that however many times. Now this would be an operator associated with the biggest integer, which just says, if in fact they're going across 10 at a time and I'm car number 20, I got to wait 2 cycles. That's all. Okay. So it turns out with this general formulation, we can ask basically how does the total waiting time depend on both the length of the queue and the size of the block? Yes.
So does the crossing time include that sort of overhead time when you're, because the cars the queue expands
to accelerate?
Right,
that's right. Yeah. So it only approximately. So that's why we could have built a better model, and also to require the fact that the queue be exactly the same size. And I said in reality it fluctuates, but so I'm just imagining.
I think that could greatly affect your.
It could alter it,
right? Because there's very little overhead time with one car going across.
Right.
For 10 block of 10.
There's that slinky effect.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that I'm trying to get that through here, but it's only imperfect. But I'm going to put in particular. We have particular parameters here, which I show here. So it turns out that for the case of we're going to go across in blocks of 2, and I guess I didn't write it down here, but basically to a first approximation, it looks like it's about 10 seconds to go from the one white line to the other white line. You got to accelerate from being stopped, go all the way across the bridge, and then if you have another car go, it takes about 1 second for that other car accelerates behind you. It's going about 30 miles an hour. It's about an extra second for every car that's going to go. In that case, this says how long do you have to wait? And this is in seconds. If in fact the queue length is this length, and basically, so you can see they're in blocks of 2 here. But look, you have to. So if you enter this thing and the queue length is 10, you're waiting on the order of almost 2 minutes. You have to have 5 executions in front of you and behind you, right? So that takes a couple minutes to unfold. But that's for the current configuration. You enter into here. What I want to do next, I want to say, what happens if you come up to this place and you see there's a queue length of 20? How could we vary the B and get a better outcome? So that's what this plot is, and it's interestingly not monotonic. So this says as the block size were bigger, and Vince thought 5 or 7. It starts to get pretty close to what's really good. So this is block size 1. If you basically everybody goes one at a time, and you're the 20th person in the queue, you got to basically have you got to dump 20 cars in front of you, and on the other side 20 more, right? So that takes you're sitting there for for 8 minutes or something. If you can just go to 2, notice though, if you go to 2, you're down to something under 4 minutes, like 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes. But it would be better if you could do 3 cars at a time. You'd be down to in here, and then you get these things. Now these are associated with 5 and 6 look the same because of the indivisibility, and 7, 8, and 9 look about the same. And so it's grossly monotone. But then out here, it starts But now back to Kevin's point, if you dump the entire, if I'm the 20th person in the queue, I can dump the entire queue. That's the best outcome, obviously, right? But now but with only 50% probability, is your queue moving when you hit there? Right. It could be that you could be moving, or they could be moving. Then now you're waiting for the whole thing to dump. Right? So
is there any uncertainty in any of this that affects safety?
Yes. Well, safety. Well, first of all, is there any uncertainty? So first of all, this should be done from the point of view of queuing theory, where the car is arriving at random intervals, and then this is all going to be much messier. We'll have to have distributions for all this kind of stuff. And so if John Shortle was here, he would complain about the fact that we're not. This is only this is a mean analysis. Safety, Claudia. I guess it is. Here's roughly how it works in practice. Is that when a car is on one of those white lines and it starts accelerating, as it goes across, and say it's dragging another car with it behind it. When that back car starts only approaching the white line, the car oncoming will take off. So it knows that. So it knows that you can see that there. So imagine I'm sitting on the white line. I can see 2 cars coming at me. I see that the third one is not coming at me. And when that car gets more or less across the bridge, I'll take off. But when I'm reporting here for calibration purposes, that's about 10 seconds. It's about 10 seconds for that block of cars to make it across the bridge. So safety, I'm sure there are accidents there. I don't have any data on accidents. Yes, Ed.
Just one quick thing.
Yep.
So if you're thinking about a process of experimentation whereby people experiment with different
Right,
block sizes,
yes,
and they are more likely to experiment with block sizes that are close to each other.
Yes, right.
So there's the distinct difference between 1 and 2. People
Right.
might be able to notice that actually
Yeah,
right away.
big
But
difference,
then once
right.
you get from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, the difference is
Exactly,
much smaller.
much smaller.
And so I'm just wondering about like the
Yep.
movement into the adjacent possible.
Right,
usually happens in
exactly.
Steps,
Right.
and maybe that's what keeps the norm.
Could very well be, but then do notice that if you go from like from 2 to 20 is about a big factor of 5 or 6 or 8 or
That's
something.
right,
So
but I mean the process itself wouldn't
exactly.
ever get there.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not-
Yeah. Or maybe watch this. Or if in fact, imagine that you're sitting there, you're the front of the line, and imagine that the norm was something like 11, and you have to count 11 cars coming across, and this is not trivial to understand. Yes, question.
What's the distance between each two pairs of cars? I would assume that for someone who's behind someone, he can see that.
You can see. That's
yeah,
right.
you can see in front of the car in front of you, and when it's 3 or 4, there's uncertainty. So people are less. There's an element of trust. You trust that the guy in front of you won't stop.
It's fair enough. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's So it turns out that now we're at the level of the individual driver idiosyncrasy to know how much gap there is and how close they're willing to take it, how much risk you're willing to do. Are you willing to be like one foot from the guy's bumper? That's somewhat. But so this I'm showing you kind of results from average analysis. I say when I say that it's 10 seconds to go across and 1 second for each additional car, those are quite approximate numbers, and we have some data, but we could do a fine job on that.
I think that for the generalizability, if that's a word, of the model, the assumption of homogeneity is huge. Because one of the reasons why these norms are diminishing in terms of the applicability is the diversity in the
True. Although I think that so what I'm going to do next, hopefully we'll address some of that. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to say, look, the problem really should be solved with queuing theory. It's a nasty, gnarly mathematical queuing theory problem. I'm not even going to try it. We're going to basically take the students' age-based models, distill out the best of them, and build an age-based model, and now say, let's run the age-based model with all different block sizes and see what we get. Now, to your point, Claudia, we should have important heterogeneity in the driver behavior in the age-based model. We don't have very much in there, but that could be added, should be added.
I was going to make a similar point. I mean, I believe this result, and it's basically a thing. Yeah, if you dump the whole queue, because even if you double that time for 20, then you're still at most 10, 20 seconds.
Right.
But the problem is, where do you stop? Is it 30?
Exactly.
Sure, if it's always 30, but then a line of 20 comes, and then you got the car that's not in the queue.
Exactly.
Still approaching the line.
Exactly.
So you have to account for that human behavior of, well, when am I going to get to go?
And in fact,
so there's that question.
So to make the point very concrete is that during rush hour, during the height of rush hour, when one side of the queue would be dumping out totally, there's just a constant flow of cars onto that side of the queue, right? And so you would never get a turn if you're on the other side. So that's a problem. And, or you need
to stop. You need to stop condition.
Exactly. You have to have some kind of way. You have to have guys there with a flag saying stop. Right? Okay, they have it George Mason at 4:30 and 7 o'clock. Right? There's one of the cadets out there saying, that's enough. Right?
That could be another question. Are those cadets any use on campus? Sorry.
Maybe we can get a grant from the police department. Build a model. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now, next is just basically the summary. Now, we built a simple model, and I'm teaching my son how to use Net Logo, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time and say this is not an exotically complicated ABM, but it's one which has the following result, that as we vary the block size, we're basically getting that something on the order of, something got 10 to 15 looks to have pretty good performance. You can get the wait time way down. And it's monotone, nice. If you wait too long, it's not good because this is the problem of, if you come to the wrong side of the queue and it's moving, you're not going to. So there is in fact some optimal behavior, and main thing to say, it's not 2, right? It's 2 is very far from the best here. Why is it 2? And that's really the question that I have. We don't have a good answer for. What Kahneman-Tversky, Thaler conditioning gives us 2? It's easy to count.
Well, I mean, we were talking about having to count 20 cars, and was that the 19th car or the 20th car? Should I go now? I don't know.
So hold the thought, Kevin. Hold that thought. I'm going to come back to it. So it turns out now what I want to think about this from the final point of view is from a game theoretic point of view. Okay, the game theoretic point of view says you're the third car in a two car norm. You're the n plus first car in an n car norm. B plus first car in a block B norm. Okay. should you go or not? So we know there's all this literature. Olson says, you know, efficiency degrades when the group gets large. Tragedy of the commons. I mean, Ostrom really has, you know, the common pool here. The common thing is, we all want to use the real estate on the bridge, and it's held in common. Nobody owns it, and so we're all gonna overexploit it for our own use by basically hogging it by going across when we want to go across, right? So I've written at the margin, for the social norm for B vehicles crossing in tandem, this person has incentive to cheat. And that's basically what same thing that Olson wrote about, Hardin wrote about. They all, that's what everybody writes about, right? It's just, you have incentive to cheat when basically, you know, it's your turn. And I'm gonna, you know, I know we're on the internet here. I'll just say it. So there was one time, okay, when I was very late for getting up to my daughter's practice, and I think I had to pay the coach.
You had to say something.
That's right. I had to get there because I had the money to pay the coach or something, and it was the middle of summer. It was hot out. I was just sick of. I waited a long time in that darn line, and I was the odd number. I was seventh, and then I was fifth, then I was third. And I said, I'm going. Okay, I'm going. And I went.
You just should have yelled, I'm from Massachusetts.
But your data didn't show any.
Or yell. No, I know. It's very, very, very rare. It didn't have me in it then. So that was only for one day. That was only one day. And I only did it once. I've been through it 100,000 times now. I've only done it once. But I'm going to report to you what happened, okay? When I went through there, and there's a guy on the other side, they're waiting, right? I'm driving across, he goes, right? So that was the extent of the enforcement, right? There is an enforcement, okay? That's the. So I've grouped here and not observed, but this incentive, this is really, you know, much of social science comes down to how to keep the cheaters from cheating, or how to write down a constitution, or how to write down something to make them so that how to incentivize so they won't cheat. Fair enough. That's something you can do today, right? And now back to the question we had some over here a little bit. Imagine we wanted to change the norm. Imagine we wanted to actively make it so we could get 5, 6, 10, 12 or something, okay? This is a big enough room. If we all had cars, we could do Schelling. Now, if any of you have read this in Schelling, this micro behavior, it's buried somewhere. Might even be a footnote, I don't know. And I'm going to apologize. It might even be that he told me this, but I don't know where you can find this. But he reports that when he was teaching the material for the micromotives behavior book, he wanted to, you know, the students were somewhat skeptical, bottom-up processes, all that kind of stuff. So he said, today when you came to class, it's on the second floor or third floor. It was one of the halls there in Harvard. And he said, you come from the right-hand side, right? And he said, yes. We walked up the stairwell on the right-hand side. The other guys were walking on their right-hand side. He said, next class, come up on the left. And for all subsequent classes, keep doing that until we can flip the norm. And he reports that it took about 6 or 8 classes, and they flipped it. And they made it so that people were walking up on the left-hand side of the stairwell. Now, of course, it's small n, or it's probably n equals, you know, it's a stairwell, so it's also a single file kind of thing too. Anyway, so it's possible to obviously to do, and now we're at the level of engineering. Now we're going to engineer a different outcome, right? So the one question would be, if all of us went up there at 5 o'clock on a Thursday or Friday or something, right, with our cars, and maybe we strategically were like every 4th car or 5th car, and we try to put in a norm of 5 going across, could we do it? I don't know. Or would we all get flicked off by the locals? I don't know. Okay, so that's it for the talk pretty much. Summary is that 2 is certainly not welfare maximizing. Why 2? We don't really understand why 2. But all these heuristics are certainly active. It's simple. It's low number. You don't have to do any counting really. You can visualize. You can see it. Could the drivers be taught a better norm? I mean, presumably they could. How hard would it be to do that, I guess, is the question. And then, what is wrong with the standard? It's a final thought point here. When we have the standard reasoning in economics that says, there is an arbitrage possibility, thus somebody will take it. I mean, that tends to be, well, it's either Panglossian or it's teleological. Maybe, depending on what functional. For example, when I was a student, we learned, the Marxist reasoning, which goes as follows, is obviously wrong for teleological reason. Marx says the working classes will be better off if they have a revolution and overthrow the oppressors. So that revolution will happen. That's teleological reasoning, right? Because it will make them better off, it will happen. But economics is very interestingly similar, right? It says, only efficient firms can make enough money to survive. So the only kind of firms that we're going to see are efficient firms. Well, you know, there's a lot of reasons why firms might not be efficient. Anyways, work in progress. If you want to see the paper, send me a request. I'll email me. I'll send you the paper. But we still have. I still would like to do more on this. I mean, so right now we're reporting 2. We're saying 2 is not the best. Engineering point of view, say 8, 10, 12 would be better. So what are the cognitive biases, limitations? Departures from rationality that give us this? Is this something more than just it's easy to count? For example, here's a different way to think about it. I thought maybe it's actually the transient character of these things. That is, right, even during rush hour, the whole thing can just go. Your queue might just go to 0. Is it the transient thing that just makes 2 is kind of natural and simple? And it's a focal point, and even 3 or 4 would not be good if the queues are actually collapsing to 0 periodically. Maybe even 3 and 4 is not. Imagine the queue collapses to 0 on your side. Other side has a queue. Now, imagine now the norm is not 2 but 3, and now imagine, but I only have 2 here. 2 go across. Can 3 go across the other way if the norm is 3? So I guess with the unstable queues, it seems like maybe, everybody knows this is better than 1, but it's not so complicated as to get into these other more complicated things. So, okay, so.
Kind of hubris involved in assuming that 2 is not right?
No, I just want to know why 2 is right. Oh well.
Because we say no, it's not right, it's wrong.
Yeah, but that's where we have both the simplified queuing theory model, Claudia, and the ABM both say, and kind of even a back of the envelope calculation would show you that 5 or 6 or 7 would give you a lower total travel time. So, and by the way, if we try to do a quick back on the envelope kind of welfare analysis. Because this thing is at it peaks at about 20 cars, over the course of a minute. I mean, you really have a couple thousand vehicles going through this intersection on one rush hour. If you could cut it from a couple thousand vehicles going from say 3 minutes down to 2 minutes, which is what you're talking about here, you could save at least a minute per vehicle. You're talking about many days of human. So typically, an environmental economist would basically try to do a so-called contingent evaluation analysis by saying how much total time is saved. And the answer is you're saving a lot of time. So there's certainly our welfare gains to be had from this. Yes.
On the question of 2, so I think we have 2 cases here. She mentioned 2 that the driver's ed that it's the norm is 2.
It wasn't. I don't know where I heard it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in any case, we have one
from.
person who thinks it's 2, and in Massachusetts it's supposedly 3. So question: how many people does it take to actually create a norm where none exists? Mm-hmm. Is it that if 1 out of 20 people does a pair
right.
of 2 because that's what they were taught or that's what they think it is, that's enough to establish a norm just because otherwise there is no rule that
right.
anybody's
otherwise
following.
there is no rule, right? And I think it must be also be the case that a lot of the people going through here don't know that it's 2. They or for some reason they're confused by it. Yeah, it's true. Stop signs, but there are a lot of people just going on singletons too. So you gotta.
So I learned. My wife's parents used to live right around the corner.
Okay.
So I learned. I think I learned that from her. Go 2 at a time.
So sure, her parents actually told her probably.
Right. Now they didn't. She didn't actually grow up there. They moved there just after she started college. So it kind of predates learning that. But the other challenge of if you increase the throughput there's another choke point further down the road as you get closer to the toll
That's true.
road.
Now they just debottleneck that. Brett, it's a cool observation. So about a half a mile down the road, there's a stop sign. Okay, mm-hmm. Where it was a choke point also. There's another queue that formed a stop sign. Right. They just put a stoplight there. Wow. About 2 months ago. Okay. I was worried that was going to mess up the it was going to modify all the data that we got, but it's brand new.
But that does affect it.
Yes, sir.
I'm concerned you're not going to get any information about Y2 looking at current traffic if the norm was created far predates. Now, how to change a norm is another question entirely,
right.
but so I mean I think those 2 questions need to be separated.
Probably.
If the norm
That's
far
probably right.
predates.
You're saying because go back to before when they had quantitative model, the ability to quantitatively model what the right number is, and somebody said, well, 2 is better than 1.
Yeah, right.
Well, but the traffic conditions are probably a lot more fluctuated, a lot more had less volume and less jamming back when the norm was created.
What would autonomous cars do?
Excellent question. You're exactly right. That's right.
What was that?
What
will driverless cars do in this environment? This is why we're not going to drive those cars for a while.
It might be more interesting to start the norm if you went up on a different day. So say 5 of us went up one day, and then at the start of peak hour went in 5, and to see how long. Because I would think it would be like I get there, I'm 20 deep, and then I just watched it.
Right.
See the pattern unfold. So
Yep.
I see, everyone's going 2 at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you got there at the start of peak hour and went through in 5,
Mm-hmm.
and then turned around.
Turned around
went
and
through
go back the other
5
way,
again,
right, exactly.
Could you reset it to 5
Yep.
on that day? So
That's a good question. Now, by the way,
because a lot of those would be locals on the road that have probably just gone, it's just.
Who are these out of towners right here? I wanted to show you guys a video of this thing, but I got worried that I have not cleared any of this research with the IRB at all, the Human Subjects Board. I think it'd be fun to try modifying the norm, but I'm sure we'd have to get approval from the board before we.
So you're not really interacting with people per se, unless you get too close to them.
Well, but if you modify, imagine we modify it to 5 and something like the accident rate increases or something. Yes. Sure. Go ahead,
I was just going to say, also, how many people would it take? Because if it's just 5 on one side and 5 on the others, depending on how many cars are there, would still continue with their 2-2-2.
Right.
Unless you have new people who've not
We have
used
to
the norm.
turn around and keep doing it for about 2 hours, right?
Yeah. And then it also speaks to having 2 for, like, instead of 7, even though there's efficiency in 7, because you're looking at instant gratification. If I'm the 2,
right.
I don't care about the 20. I'm going. Versus with the 5, there's a longer delay in that short-term goal versus short-term happiness versus long-term.
I think there's an observability issue, because if you're sitting in a line, are you really going to bother to count?
Well, that's the thing. Like,
Well, that's the point.
You have to count, but it's problematical to count.
I'd lose the count after the second. Because 3's too much. You're sitting there. There are lots of other things going on.
Maybe that's why it's 2 and not 3.
That's what I'm saying.
It's easier to detect cheaters when it's 2.
And flip them off later.
Karen, you have a question.
Oh, yeah, I'm just curious also about perhaps, like, I mean, people would never go for this here in traffic, but to actually stop people and ask them why, you know, I mean, it seems.
It's a natural thing to do from a scientific point of view is to stop them. Now, would they stop? Would you stop if you're on your way home from rush hour?
No, if you hold a $5 bill.
Well, another thing is, you said that there's a sign up there that says single lane bridge or something. Why isn't something on there if it is an unspoken norm, 2 at a time?
Right.
Because on your Metro cards it says stand on the right, walk on the left.
Yep.
So why isn't there a sign that says 2
Because
at a
it's
time?
Metro card.
It should. Even on their paper card it used to.
That's
Check.
on you, yeah.
Did you have there was a chart about absolute total time taken by 1, 2, 3, 4 cars to going together?
Well, so that would have been one of these optimization calculations where so one of these things where it says that if in fact you were to go, so this is the block size. So if in fact you were to go, 2 at a time, then you'd be waiting about 200 seconds. If you were to go 5 at a time, you're waiting about 100 seconds.
That's with a constant queue size.
That's right. That's right.
So maybe the calculation is that if I cut my time in half versus if I go from half to quarter to third, the difference is so large in that first.
It's that gap, right?
First gain
Right.
that the marginal gain is not enough. So people say.
Right.
2 is
Exactly. That's it. Yeah.
And then all the other heuristics of I can't count more than 2 easily and all that.
Right. There's marginally small benefits.
Correct. So they settle for 2.
Yeah. I think it's reasonable to assert that, but I'm sure that a reviewer is going to say, can you prove that, or they'll have some complaint about that. Anybody else?
Oh, it's just another social norm started, like, you know when they were doing the roadworks on Main Road and 123 down. Anyway, they shut it down to 1 lane, but originally it had to like line up and it would go through very slowly. And then every now and again there would be a cheater that would go, because you could still go down and then to turn left into Arlington Boulevard or whatever. And then by the 6 months into it, there was a lot more cheating going on.
Oh, okay.
So people, it's like people see one cheater and then cuss, and then cuss and go, I'm cheating.
And if any of you guys listen to the Freakonomics radio show, it's on WAMU on Sundays. They talked about that last week. They talked about is there any? Do you actually? Does the group move faster when there's cheaters or not? And they made some very peculiar assumptions. And they made some very odd statements in there where they said, they were saying that if in fact, yes, of course the cheater gets through faster, but they're saying even having the cheater go faster can make the whole group go faster. That was not clear to me why that would be the case. But anyway, the Freakonomics guys have been dealing with that. Yes.
In the psychology department, there's a driving simulator.
Oh, okay.
And it might be a good opportunity to collaborate with them.
Does it have multiple vehicles, presumably, right?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but
good point. Yeah.
It might be one, but it should be sufficient to
But
conduct experiments.
And then back to Karen's point about asking people, maybe what we could do is maybe we could just survey the whole neighborhood, because all the people there go through that intersection, obviously, right? Instead of having to stop them. But that's the odd thing that economists are famous for not actually asking people anything, because they always just try to use revealed preference from the actual behavior to figure out how people are doing.
You could, instead of having the simulator, you could try net local behavior.
Behavior, yeah, that's right.
Behavior space.
Hubnet, where you get the joystick and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
It's not clear that would work the same way, though, right? I mean, the pattern of behavior for this specific bridge, they may not necessarily be able to carry that over to any other environment because they just associate it with these types of bridges, maybe.
So they have the framing effect is that they use it.
It's also rush hour, so your thought patterns are different than if you're sitting in a lab.
Kind of more real. But I was wondering about something. What if you just what would you think happens if you just put up? Don't try and modify behavior, but just put up a big sign with the number 3 on it on both sides. So not 3 is the right one, not just the number 3. Would people just read into it?
Excellent idea.
I should.
Yeah.
They wouldn't look at it.
Like free all a mile before the run, a mile after, so you subliminally see it.
It's called a priming effect.
Yeah, you can do that.
But usually when you just have a number on the street, it's supposed to be the mile marker. But back in Florida, it is the mile marker to the Keys. Just a number is just a mile marker, so you're in mile 3.
Yeah, but if it's like you said, there's a stop sign right before the no stop sign.
No stop signs. It's just a sign that says single lane bridge ahead.
Okay.
And then the white line. By the way, I don't believe there's any instruction about that white line is just there. It doesn't say what that white line is for.
What it represents.
It's really weird. It's just
So this is not it's not a legal. It's not a stop sign. It's not a legal sign. It's just a line to kind of somebody put there.
Single lane bridge ahead. Yield to oncoming traffic. That's all. That's
so
the
if you put up a little sign with the octagon shape, looks like a stop sign with the number 3 in it, right? not an actual stop sign. I'm just wondering how fast it would take people to start reinterpreting that number as how many cars have to go. And then I'm wondering about how many other bridges will start turning into 3 at a time instead of 2 at a time.
I'd like to find just one more that does 2, just to back up this case. But I also think that you guys have many good ideas. My sense is that imagine we actually got some of them approved by the human subjects board or whatever. I bet we probably want to think about it and only try one of them or 2, because by the time we got to like the 5th intervention, the locals would be so mad at us for trying to modify their behavior.
There's another one on the other side of Route 7. I think it's Seneca Road, perhaps.
Okay, or going into Great Falls,
going
Karen,
into
right?
Great
Yeah,
Falls
right.
Off of Route 7.
Yeah, you're right. That's
It's and I remember it typically being 2 and 2. I don't know if it gets as jammed.
I don't know either.
Times, but it might because it's right off.
You're right.
7.
It's very close to Route 7. That's right. I forgot. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
There's a similar situation. It's not a bridge, but it's emergent behavior, and I've noticed it's on Yates Ford Road where Henderson comes in. There's a stop sign there for the people coming in, but I've noticed it will back up on Yates Ford Road from people stopping to let the people stop. It always ticks me off because I think there's so much overhead time associated with stopping and going.
Right.
I think it's actually adding to the traffic.
Probably.
But it's an emergent behavior there with people being courteous to let people who otherwise might not have much of a chance to go.
All right. Yeah, I think we have many ideas of how to debottleneck Fairfax County traffic here. We should.
You see similar behavior at the bicycle crossings. I know people get pissed off because cyclists blow right through it, but oftentimes cars will stop for a cyclist.
Yeah, right.
And then 2 will go, and then a car will stop.
The whole C&O Canal one over there.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Yep. I'll send you the paper just how